Well, good morning, all. My name is Corey Henry. I'm the Central Zone Fire Management Officer here for the Upper Peninsula Fire Management on the west zone of the Hiawatha. So it's interesting trying to keep track of all that. But what I wanted to talk to you guys today about is our standard operating procedures in light of COVID-19. We're going to cover a lot with the local procedures and touch a little bit on the extended attack / Western assistance procedures. And then lastly, we're going to go over an AAR from a fire near Meeker, Colorado, where they tried to put in place a lot of these guidelines that we're looking at and how everything went. So if you guys have any questions, feel free just to chime in whenever you have the question. All right, so first off here, it says, I'm not going to read all these verbatim. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to read them, but I will capture the highlights. It doesn't seem like it here sitting in Munising, looking out my window at 20 plus inches of snow. But we're just about to fire season here in the next week or two. The southern part of the zone, and I know the east zone and the west zone up here in the UP are experiencing areas that are currently snow free. So we want to make sure that that we're all ready, that we're all working within the newly established guidelines in regards to this COVID-19. Sid had mentioned the letter from the chief, so I just grabbed a chunk of her letter and really focused on some of the highlights. So I'll let you guys read through those, but it touches on COVID-19 exposure and transmission in regards to smoke and exposure to firefighters and communities. That's a big reason why we're not doing prescribed fire this year. As well as that, it's one of the big reasons that we had talked about earlier, really hitting the fires hard and getting them knocked down early to decrease the exposure of firefighters and the public to not only each other but also smoke. I talked about that rapid containment. We've talked about with Eric and Sid here a minute ago the expectations and the delegations of authority, and we're developing and have a presentation for some of our risk-based analysis on kind of how we're coming up with these decisions based on that risk management. And then I know there's a lot of questions in regards to the militia force and how they fit in this year. And the chief spells it out right here, use the skills of the entire agency workforce in fire this year. And that's going to be crucial in order for us to accomplish our goals successfully and more importantly, safely. So I'll give you guys just one more minute here to finish reading those. We'll go on to the next one. And just so you know, in the comments section, I've uploaded this slideshow. I've uploaded the AAR from the fire we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and I've also included a link to a web page at the Eastern Area Coordination Center, and that has a link that directly leads you to the wildland fire response plan that's been put together, Eric mentioned. All right, so essentially if rapid containment is our predominant strategy, we're going to hit stuff hard and fast, but in an orderly manner. We're going to go ahead and be using the same procedures that we've always used. The fire is reported to the DO. The DO instructs dispatch to dispatch whichever resources. And, once on scene, the IC reports size up and requests more resources. The big thing with this year is ensuring, one, that we're not freelancing. We're not just going to fires without being dispatched. Do not go to a fire without being dispatched. We want to ensure that we've got, which vehicle you're in, with vehicle number identified, and if indeed we put in place a staging area, which is one of our plans for fires this year, to not bombard one scene with a whole bunch of people, and it allows us to track where people are in the event that somebody is infected. And it also allows to maintain that social distancing if we don't have to expose people. So the big thing about this is just ensure that you're going through dispatch, and ensure that you go over your gear and doing PM checks on your vehicles. If we get into a situation where we're going to have high fire danger, we may ask certain people to stage in certain places, in conjunction with that one person per vehicle. All right, things to consider before responding. First of all, does the DO have your cell number? Ensuring that we have contact with you in the event that we need you is obviously imperative. And then the next thing is the MI-FIT. It's an MI-FIT checklist. We'll go over that here in a little bit. But before you guys decide to become available or respond to fires, we want to make sure that everyone's going through the checklist. And that provides safety for other responders, for the public, and for yourself. So like I said, we'll go over that in a little bit, but we just need to make sure that you guys are truthful and we're taking into account these precautions. Another thing to consider is pack test. I know the mic went over this a little bit, but the pack test is a little bit different this year. If you've taken a pack test and refresher, then you are valid to get a red card. You may not have it in hand yet, but we will be in the process of printing out updated red cards here within the next week or so, with the intent of putting them in your mailbox at work. If you've got seasonals who may not have a mailbox, we'll go ahead and put those into the supervisor's mailbox as well. If you have not taken the pack test and refresher this year, but did so in the last year, and you were cleared by e-medical, then you guys your pack test has been exempted and you guys are clear to fight fire. If you have not cleared e-medical and you have not taken the pack test, then you are not exempt and must perform a pack test. You are not exempted and you will not be allowed to fight fire. If you did not have a pack test last year, then you're not exempt. The biggest thing with all of these is ensure that you're getting into e-medical, you're submitting your packet to me, and I will get it back to you as soon as possible. In the event that you meet the criteria for further examine OF 178, then there's additional questions and emails that are going to be asked of you. So I ask you to, as promptly as possible, answer those questions and get them back to the coordinator for e-medical. If you have any questions on that, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. One thing further on that, if you submit a packet in e-medical, let me know. If I don't get a message or anything from e-medical, it's just an assumption that I'm checking that all the time. And as with most all of us, I'm super busy and sometimes don't check it for a while. So just a quick email telling me that you submitted it is good. Moving on, line gear. I know that not all of us are at the office. Honestly, the majority of us are not. So we need to make sure that you guys get an opportunity to check out your line gear. Make sure that you've got the listed items as well as others. If that means taking time on a Saturday when you're sure no one's going to be in the office to make sure that you're continuing that social distancing, then go ahead and do that. If with any of these things, if you don't have it, go ahead and talk to the district engine captain, and we can work on getting you some of this equipment and gear. Radio, again, not being in the office, we got to make sure that our radios are ready to go. Make sure they've had the latest clone. Make sure that if you guys are using rechargeable batteries, make sure they're charged, and make sure that you know how to use it. So just going over that stuff that typically we would go over in the refresher. Make sure that you're checking the latest MOB guide to make sure that again that your radio is cloned with the proper channels. Vehicle, again, with most of us being out, when was the last PM check done? Do you have a full tank of gas? Do you have a hand tool? The ability to go into one of the fire trucks and grab a hand tool this year is probably not going to happen. We're trying to keep the fire crews as far, we're, as mentioned earlier, the fire crews are hanging out together, but we don't want to have a whole lot of other people going into the trucks, touching the tools. So coming to a fire, responding to a fire with your own hand tool is going to be imperative this year. Another thing is grabbing some MREs, at least through that first 24-hour operational period. We're not sure that we're going to be able to provide a whole lot of meals, at least in that first 24 hours. And with the COVID, with enough people and enough businesses being closed down, it may be nearly impossible. So we're requesting and recommending that you guys carry at least 3 or 4 MREs with you. And again, PM checks. And again, if you have any questions or need anything, talk to your captain on your district. So I'm not going to read this entire thing. I'll let you guys do it. Like I said, it's also part of the attached PowerPoint slideshow. But essentially what it's saying is we need to carry the proper ID, the mission essential paperwork. We're going through that Am I Fit checklist beforehand, and making sure that when possible, we're also continuing to abide by that 1 person per vehicle. In the event that you are dispatched off forest, the 1-day drive rule is what they're looking at. And if you indeed need to use commercial airlines, following CDC and FAA direction for travel. So the Am I Fit checklist that I was talking about, like I said, before you guys decide to become available for fire locally or off forest, we need to go through these checklists. And honestly, even before coming to work, but in context with fire. So we start at the top with number 1, do I have a fever, cough, or difficulty breathing? Number 2, have I been exposed to anyone that has tested positive for COVID-19 or has exhibited fever, cough, or difficulty breathing? Number 3, do I have an underlying health or other issue that may place me in a high risk category? Or number 4, have I over the last 14 days traveled to countries or regions which A, are federal, state, tribal, or local government acknowledged widespread community outbreak, or B, areas or counties which the federal government has issued an active travel restriction or advisory? Or C, okay, if so, should I be in a 14-day self-quarantine? So the direction is that if you answered yes to either 1, 2, 3, or 4, that you need to let your supervisor know, and that you are potentially have been exposed to COVID-19. From there on, we will come up with different mitigations, including not limited to, 14-day self-quarantine. But the long story is short here is if you do check any of those 4, we recommend that you do not participate in wildland fire activities, at least until you're confirmed to not have any additional. So that's the end of that slideshow. Give me 1 sec here. Do you have any questions on that?
Hey Corey, this is Sam, and hello group. This is Sam Dirksen, the Assistant Fire Management Officer for the Upper Peninsula. And I want to reiterate this checklist and the statement that Corey made earlier as far as being truthful. This is really critical. I don't want to understate a cough that somebody might have. I think we need to be really honest in this. If you're feeling weird on a particular day and you have a cough, it may be nothing. It may be a flu. It may be seasonal allergies, but we need to make sure that we're letting people know that this is occurring, because I guarantee if you show up on a fire and you're coughing, it's going to cause a little bit of concern amongst your peers, and we just need to really be honest with that and be upfront and not say, oh, it's just a little allergy I have. At least let the folks, your supervisor, know that that's what you think it is, and let them make that determination. Don't try to muscle through any sort of cough that you might have or any sort of health problem So I just want to stress that, because I think that'll make things a lot easier when we do mobilize to a fire, if everybody really takes this into consideration. So.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I'm just going to reiterate a few things before we go into this AAR. First of all, we are going to do everything within our power to maintain that social distancing, regardless of what that looks like. You know, they say 6 feet. If 6 feet is good and you can be 12 feet, obviously, it's better. So we're going to do everything we can to maintain that social distancing. We are absolutely going to have an increase in aviation usage, as Eric stated. Another thing that we're looking at doing, that I intend on doing, is increasing the usage of heavy equipment. So essentially, every fire we get, go ahead and sending a dozer to right away. Anything that we can do to help mitigate that exposure to additional people. We're going to, and I know I said this before, but I just want to reiterate how we're going to be tracking resources. As Eric said too, that allows us to, in the event of exposure, it allows us to track back and make sure that everyone that was potentially exposed is notified. The biggest thing that we're trying to do is develop mitigations to safely do our job. As stated earlier, at the end of the day, we've got a mission. In the event that there is a fire, our job is to safely and effectively extinguish the fire. So we understand the severity of the threat of COVID. What we're doing is again, as Eric stated again, that we're working extremely hard to develop those mitigations to do it as safely as possible. At the end of the day, regardless of what mitigations are in place, this is a personal decision. And if an individual does not feel safe, even given the mitigations, those turn down standards are there. And of course, we're going to support that decision. So with all that being said, this fire, can everyone see the line fire page? Make sure I'm doing this right.
No.
Okay. How do I do that? What's that? Okay. Cool. I got Doug sitting next to me, so he's filling me in if I'm doing this right or wrong. So the line fire was last week just west of Meeker, Colorado. It involved multiple jurisdictions and agencies. And according to their AAR, this is how things went as far as COVID measures and mitigations. The big thing about this one, it involved multiple jurisdictions and agencies. Obviously, as many of you know, anytime that we go to a fire here in the UP, it's going to include multiple agencies, a lot of VFDs, DNR, just a lot of people from different walks of life. So, it says they had taken many steps in their station to limit and minimize exposure to firefighters as entering the fire season. There's been a lot of good discussions and decisions made in regards to COVID-19, which I think is very similar to what we've been doing, including the wildland fire response plan, doing this refresher. However, just like everything we plan, it looks good on paper until smoke is in the air. So what this is it's their experiences once fire was on the ground, once smoke was in the air, once the individuals were on the line. So, the first thing they come up with is social distancing is very difficult and stressful situation. The crew discussed social distancing before leaving for the fire and to try to abide by the guidelines. Upon arrival, multiple structures, vehicles were burning, and the instincts to protect life and property take over. I think that's something that we're going to see, and although we're going to try our best to maintain those social distancing guidelines, when things like this start to happen, it becomes very difficult. And our entire careers, we've gone over things again and again and again so that we know how to react. And now with some of these guidelines in place, it's a little contradictory to what we're used to. So The next thing they found was when evacuating public, maintaining distance is difficult when property landowners are panicking and looking for answers and guidance. I know I've been in this situation numerous times where there's structures threatened, and the landowner, property owners are coming right up to you asking what they should do, how they should do it, how they should get their animals out, things like that. Thirdly, when working with multiple agencies, the mitigation measures and messages have varied widely and are hard to enforce or maintain. I think this is going to be one of the more difficult things we have to deal with. As Eric mentioned, we are reaching out to all of our partners and letting them know what we intend on doing. And the DNRs and the federal agencies, I think, are going to be easier to get this message to, and to ensure that they're following similar measures. The VFDs, the sheriff's offices, although I've been sharing all of our information with them, just due to the fact of they're volunteers, and don't do this on a daily basis, and have their other jobs, that's going to be a little more difficult. So we're putting some strategies in place, dividing the fire up, trying to maintain our forces in one area and other forces in other areas. But as we all know, that is certainly going to be difficult. Briefings are hard to conduct in the field with large crowds and maintain the appropriate distance that is recommended. We usually don't have microphones or platforms in initial attack, so it's harder to hear and voice critical information to multiple crews. That I agree, it's going to be hard to make sure that we're maintaining and everyone is gaining and getting all that critical information. Once dispatched, we utilized 4 vehicles with 8 firefighters. This idea seemed like a good idea until arrival, and the parking and safety areas for vehicles was minimal. It added a little bit of a cluster, you could say, to the initial arrival at the incident. We've all been on IA and know how difficult it is to park safely in small spaces. So now we go to that one person, one vehicle. That's where that staging area idea is going to be imperative. Upon arrival, personnel jumped into different trucks and engines to engage on the fire, creating more contaminated surfaces by different people at different times of the incident. It is very difficult to keep equipment sanitized throughout an incident. Example, truck, radios, hand tools, like we talked about before, chainsaws, steering wheels, everything that goes along with it. A few individuals did wear masks and experienced a harder time communicating to one another, thus decreasing the distance between individuals. The people who did wear masks seemed to be touching their faces and adjusting the mask more. So I guess what I would like to do is open it up to a little bit of discussion. I'd like some input on some of these findings, what people think, and just have a short little discussion in regards to it. Does anyone have anything?
So, Corey, this is Keith. A lot of the things that I see in there are particularly operational in orientation, but what's really, I think, going to be a real challenge is when you get something at the type 2 or type 1 level, where you're going to have those logistical support functions and how those are going to work in this particular type of situation. I see that being the real challenge.
Yeah, I agree. I know that response plan goes into that a little bit, and going into that village concept, or a lot more spike camps, and getting away from that historic large fire camp model. But I completely agree with you. It's going to be interesting to see how we mitigate through a lot of these challenges. Anyone else? This is the participation part, guys.
So I'll add a little bit. Yeah, you read down through this and you could easily see these issues coming up, especially during the initial attack phase. And like Keith said, large fire support is going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to look very, very different from what we're used to. There's going to be use of spike camps, as Corey mentioned, but the traditional briefing in the morning is probably not going to happen. So there's going to have to be some workarounds developed to deal with this and still maintain that social distance. And that's kind of why we've kind of backed off and went to the module concept, because really it's going to be impossible to fight fire and stay 6 feet apart if you're working on the same module.
Yeah, I agreed, Eric. And you know, my concern comes again, and we have additional resources coming in, be it you know, militia, or be it some of our other agency partners, and you know, trying to again maintain that social distancing, because the engines who are in that module concept have been exposed to one another, whereas you know, adding the additional people increases that potential exposure. As far as the, you know, the large assignments go, I certainly hope and I anticipate that we are going to follow some of the more Alaska style camps, where again everyone is in spike camp. We have our radio briefings. I know the Superior in the Boundary Waters has done that very successfully, where they have people spread out over 100,000 acres, you know, across the Boundary Waters and fires.
So I'd like to hear from some of the guys that are on the engines. How do they think that any of this is going to work? Got any input there, guys? Any input, guys?
This is Colin Birkland. My main concern is that COVID-19 can be asymptomatic. So we can answer questions honestly. We can show no signs of anything and still have it. That's just my biggest concern.
Yeah, this is Brenda. That's a good point, Colin. It's something that they haven't really clued into is asymptomatic folks often lose their sense of smell. And unfortunately, that didn't get added into the checklist.
So yeah, I had a question as well.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna chime in as well. You know, just expanding on what Colin said. You know, the module 1 concept, you know, the family concept that we have, you know, really adds to that. You know, no matter how much we wear gloves or wear masks, you know, we're in close quarters all the time, and you know, again, you know, that's not just impacting our module, but you know, the immediate things, the people around us. So yeah, that's definitely a concern. And you know, like Sam said and Colin said, you know, we can be as honest and open. I think it's really critical that we, you know, we have really good, you know, cohesion and you know, we have good network that we can support each other. But there's still that open-ended, you know, asymptomatic. You know, we can do everything we can. But I think, you know, to expound on what Sam said is, you know, the key thing is that, you know, when you're in that module or family operational mode, just, you know, continue to support each other and build cohesion, you know, to be able to make the right decisions at the right time.
Yeah, this is Sam. So, you know, we're trying to address as much as we can those asymptomatic conditions that you can't really see or hear. You know, like coughing's fairly obvious. The one thing we're trying to mitigate is to buy digital thermometers for our crews so they can do daily checks and document those changes on a daily basis. So we can try to detect the change as quickly as possible. And, you know, some of it is going to be impossible to track, but, you know, we're trying to utilize all of the tools that we have to identify folks that may show very few or little symptoms. And yeah, there are a certain number of people out there that won't show any signs. So it is a problem that I'm not sure how you can actually fully address because there's no way to tell if someone isn't showing any signs and feels fine. So I think those self-assessments of the individual on a regular basis, not just at work, but at home, also with the people that they're around on a regular basis, because our family extends to all of our families at home. And so we just have to try to be as responsible as we can as an individual too, before we come to work. So, I mean, I don't really know how else to address that other than making sure you're taking care of yourself and recognizing that others around you could be impacted by your decisions.
Yeah, I think that's, a really good point to that responsibility, that you mentioned. And I've been in contact with one of the engine bosses down here on Manistee and talked a little bit about that and, what they're doing because they're in fire season already. And he talked a lot about that responsibility and that they spend a lot of time cleaning. If they're not responding to a fire, they're just being responsible and doing everything they can to, keep everyone healthy and keep the module running and keep their folks at home healthy as well.
This is Shelby. One of the things I just kind of want to add into this part of the conversation is, one quote here from Moltke's on the Art of War is, he insisted that no plan lasted beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main army. Only a layman, he argued, would believe that a commander developed a plan and followed it exactly, foreseeing all developments to its successful conclusion. To me, the thing that I come back to is, we're going to work on putting together, pulling information from the WFRP, putting together SOGs. We're going to have the plans in place. We have a lot of that stuff that we'll work through. And then on a daily basis, duty officers will be working with the engine captains to get a daily plan forward. But really, at the end of the day, we just don't have all the knowns, and we're not going to. Long-term outlook, we're talking potential for up to 18 months of being in this sort of scenario. So again, there's a lot of the unknowns. We're not going to be able to plan for every situation. So to me, it's not getting too far down into the tactics or the weeds of what folks are going to be encountering out in the field, say during the IA. And I think that's what this AAR really captures, that there's going to be things that we're going to be encountering that sound great when we make the decision or drop the plan in the vacuum, but when it comes to the boots on the ground, we need to have that flexibility for folks to be able to make those decisions on a fly and trust them to be able to do that and empower them to do that. And, I think that's kind of the point of what we're trying to hit today and also just the next few days and moving forward. To me, some of the things we can also do with that is, we always talk about in fire, having those slides, and the more slides that you get, you're able to better engage on different things because you got those reference points. But again, while we don't have slides for operating within a pandemic, we can still use some of the same tools that we've had. So, one example would be take the 10 and 18 and apply that to a pandemic situation. COVID-19, we can kind of go through the same checklists. Do we know what's happening? Do we know where those things are? No, we don't. So how are we going to put some of those mitigations in place and move forward? And again, there's not going to be easy answers, and it's going to be constantly changing. So what plan we come with today is going to be different from tomorrow. One thing that Brenda threw out there in the chat box was first sites camping are closed under the order, and we had some slightly different information in the presentation already. Things are going to be rapidly changing, guidance changing, etc. And that's going to be something that we need to stay abreast on. So.
Yeah, thank you, Shelby. In addition to that, I think feedback is going to be critical for the folks that are on the line, working in the engines, working on fires. We need that critical feedback. If something's not working, we need to know. As Shelby mentioned, we're all in the same boat. We're all learning as we're going on this thing. So honest, critical feedback is going to be imperative to being successful and safe.
This is Sid. Just wanted to interject something about the discussion regarding buying thermometers and taking temperature. This came up at the regional COVID call last night, just about general bringing people back to work, how do we do this? Just to let you know, there are some discussions at higher levels regarding, is this HIPAA information, you know, who gathers this, who keeps it? I asked, and apparently I did ask Kathy Lynn, and she did say that there are negotiations with the union regarding that at the national level. So just be aware that direction may come down from the top that may or may not be different than what we are planning on doing here.
So I got a question. As first responders, how does the Ryan White Act play into that?
That's a really good question. I don't have an answer, and I'm not going to try and guess. Okay.
So that's something that we may want to consider. If people aren't aware of what the Ryan White Act is, it was an act named after Ryan White, who died of AIDS, and it essentially says that as a first responder, we are given the right to know if someone we've been in contact with is infected with an infectious disease, and it bypasses some of that HIPAA. So something that maybe perhaps some of us can try to track some of that down too.
I will run that up to Kathy Lynn and make sure that those are in those discussions.
All right.
Yes, Sid, and that's actually part of the wildland fire response plan that the Silver team put out. So that verbiage is in that document too, if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's out there and then people are now questioning it. So this is a very fluid situation. So I'm not saying it's going to change, but do not be surprised if it does change. And again, Corey, I will run that up the flagpole to make sure that they are considering that as well.
Thank you, Sid. All right, is there any other discussion in regards to this? Anyone have any other questions, any other comments?
Yeah, Corey, I have one here. Yeah, I was just wondering with the asymptomatic issues, and then it wasn't included in the paper here, but hearing that losing your sense of smell could be an indication, and I was just wondering if there's any evidence behind that of where that was coming from, because I haven't heard that at all anywhere else, and I was just wondering if I suddenly lose my sense of smell, if I need to go to the doctor.
I don't know the answer to that, Gage. I know that it has been part of some of the CDC documentations that they've been sending out. As far as if you lose your smell, I guess I can't answer that. Sorry. Anyone else have any input on that?
There is quite a bit of anecdotal evidence that this seems to be one of the early onset symptoms that people will, and I haven't heard about it being related to the asymptomatic, but people will go like, wow, you know, they're laughing and joking about it, and then by the evening they're running a fever and they've been infected. So it's just something to consider. If all of a sudden, like me, I don't have a very good sense of smell anyway, so I wouldn't notice it. But if you do have a good sense of smell and all of a sudden you lose it, you may want to go in and request a test. And they are not doing maybe they've increased it, but a couple of weeks ago when we had somebody that was just sick and not feeling well here in the office, and there was a lot of pressure about, oh, you got to assume that this is a positive, and so we asked the person to get tested, and they're only testing. Well, you as first responders could get tested. First responders, medical personnel, and people who are really, really sick, and the rest of them, they're saying just stay home.
So I just dropped the newest CDC guidance for symptoms in there, Corey, if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Excellent, thank you. Okay.
And just to echo off that, Chris put this into the chat box, but the CDC guidance, the latest CDC guidance, is from July 2020. So it's not, it's not new. It's just, it's been updated. So They are slowly starting to increase some of the testing capability in the Upper Peninsula. The Michigan Tech is now processing some of the testing. They are able to handle up to 40 tests per day. That at least alleviates, prior to this, all of the UP tests were going to Idaho, and it was taking up to 2 weeks for any processing to occur and then come back. Though what they're saying is you don't want to show up at the doctor's office and request to be tested, as some of the clinics are starting to stand up more testing capability. They are requesting that you call them, and then they will take the information that you have and determine if you are able to come in and be tested.
All right,
good to go, Corey?
Outstanding. If there's no other discussion in regards to that, remember that in the chat box, I have dropped the PowerPoint, the AAR, and also that link to the wildland fire response plan put together by Eastern Area. As always, if you guys have any questions, concerns, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. Other than that, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Corey.
Corey, just one more comment. A lot of this is just going to fall on your situational awareness with going to the IA situation thinking that everyone's infected or could infect you, and watching what you touch. Don't pick stuff up that other people have handled. When the volunteers or the public approaches you, take a step back and courteously, tell them to keep their distance. So it's, you just got to think about these things going into it and keep it in mind while you're there. I know it's dynamic, but it's just one more thing to consider.
Yeah, that's affirmative, Lucy. You're a little bit broken, but I think we got the gist of it. And a lot of that goes back to taking that personal responsibility to maintain that social distancing and making sure that, like you mentioned, we're not picking up tools and things like that. And so thanks for the input.
All right, thank you. Yeah, there's also a lot of good information being shared over in the chat box as well. That direction on consult with your doctor over the phone, and for folks that have apps on their phones, they can access their doctors. Like Blue Cross Blue Shield, they've got a FetBlue app. It sounds like all the co-pays are waived at this time to be able to consult remotely. So a lot of good information sharing. I appreciate that. Also a couple catch-ups you've been seeing in the chat box. Thanks for bringing up that dispersed camping sites are closed as well. It's good to have the most current info. And there was also a little info on some of the waivers. It sounds like the first aid CPR waivers, sounds like those are coming down the pipeline. And then also for the forest protection officers, there is one in place, and that's going to get shared out.